Alright guys, this is a tough game to show you. I'm a national master. I'm rated over 2200 USCF. This is a 60 plus 30 over the board game. So 30-second increment, 60 minutes to begin with. I fall for a checkmate and 1 at the end of the game with 10 minutes on my clock. So watch till the end. This is a crazy game. I'm playing my friend Kevin. He's rated in the 1700s. Sometimes he's as high as 1800. And the last time we played, he played bishop to g7 and pawn to d6 for a King's Indian defense. This time he played d5 going into a Grunfeld. After takes. Here I throw a little surprise weapon at him, bishop to d2. This is something you might want to use in your own games if you're a d4 player. And the idea is, after bishop to g7, e4, if black plays knight takes c3, which is similar to the main line of the Grunfeld, we can take back with the bishop. And after pawn to c5, the typical Grunfeld move, here we can play d5. And we meet this g7 bishop on the long diagonal. And the problem for black is after this trade, now these squares are opened up and the black king is going to be on g8. So this creates some extra attacking chances for white. So for example, queen a5, hitting the pawn, queen d2, castle. Now there's two good plans for white, and white already has a clear advantage. You could either play knight to f3, or if you're ambitious, you could play h4, h5, and you have this rook on the h-file ready to checkmate the black king. So this is a fun way to play it, bishop to d2. Let's go back to the game line. Instead of taking on c3, Kevin retreats, knight to b6. I play bishop to e3, defending this twice. And at this point, I had a pretty long think. I would like to play knight f3, but I know bishop to g4 is coming. So I took one move to play h3, preventing bishop to g4. Pawn to e5, dynamic move by black. And here I play pawn to d5, which I think is the correct decision, locking up the center, and I want to make this bishop a bad piece. The bishop runs into the pawn, whereas if you look at my bishops, they're both going to be pretty open. This one will come to e2. You can see both diagonals are open for both bishops. The g7 bishop runs into some issues with that pawn. Knight to d7. I think c6 right away maybe was the critical try there. I play knight f3, c6, and now after I take, pawn takes. There was no knight takes back. Black has an isolated c pawn. So I'm going to try to use that isolated pawn to increase my advantage. Bishop e2, then I castle. Rook c1, lining up with the c pawn. Queen b8. And at this point, I preferred the placement of my rook to either black's rooks, and I prefer the placement of my bishops to black's bishops. And I also think black's knights are a little bit clumsy. They're superfluous knights, meaning they attack each other. That's often not a good thing. And at this point, I had 36 minutes, and I spent 8 of those minutes on queen to b3. And the idea is I'm trying to apply some pressure on f7 and some pressure on b6. Pawn to a4, and then I drop the queen back. So now my queen's eyeing c6, and I do still have a plan to get my queen on this diagonal soon. Bishop a6 offering the trade. I keep developing. Takes. Rook c8. Here I like this move a lot. I played pawn to b3. And the idea with b3 is if black takes, I'm taking back with the queen, hitting on this diagonal. And if black pushes, which he did in the game, I played b4 with the idea of queen to b3. I do think in hindsight, though, this was a little too soon to play b4. It's the right idea. First, what I should have done is tried to provoke some kingside weaknesses with pawn to h4. Now, let's say black plays knight f6, a natural move, trying to kind of guard this h5 square, put a little counter pressure on e4. Now I can use this knight that used to be on c3, came to e2. I can bring him over to the king side. So it makes that a really useful rerouting of the knight. And at this point, I'm threatening h5 because it's guarded by the knight. And if black plays h5, now my knight can plant on g5, the other knight, and there's no pawn to h6 to kick it. And after queen c7, b4, now we can see the queen coming on the diagonal is an even stronger threat because of this g5 knight that cannot be kicked out by the h-pawn. So pawn to h4 was a nice improvement here. This really wasn't on my radar. I was just so set on b4 after my long think on playing b3. So now knight f8 was played, and I see this knight coming to e6, and that sort of kills my plan of knight to g5. So I wasn't a huge fan of that. So I decided to play actively with my bishop, threatening bishop to d6, hitting the queen, and double attacking the pawn at the same time. Knight to d7 to defend the pawn, also threatening to take me. So bishop d6, queen a7, queen b3, getting on the diagonal. And here I kind of expected a move like queen to a4, but queen to a6 was played in the game. And you can see here this move has a dubious mark. I was really looking hard at, can I play knight to g5 here? So at this point, I had 19 minutes on the clock. I spent 4 minutes on this move. So it wasn't that I didn't give this due respect as a critical moment, but I wasn't able to calculate it clearly. Knight to g5 is the correct move, and I'll show you what I missed. After queen takes e2, knight takes f7, there's a threat of knight h6, double check, queen and knight, followed by the queen coming to g8, mate. So there's a mate threat in 2. Black's best move is h5. That was in my calculation. And at this point, I looked at ideas like knight takes pawn check, knight h6 check, knight g5 check. But what I didn't look at was bishop takes f8, which opens up the d6 square. And after black takes back, knight to d6 check. So this is the discovered check using the knight to attack the rook. But it's still a little bit complicated. After king h7, take, here the material is equal. So you still have to be okay with saying, all right, I have a rook and a pawn for bishop and knight. Usually the bishop and knight are stronger than the rook and pawn, but there's a couple other factors at play here. The knight and bishop are very passive. This king is more exposed than my king. Both of my rooks are on good files. The queen's well placed. The a pawn's weak. And there's one move here that really applies the quick pressure. Pawn to b5. Black cannot take with the queen because I can take back, and the c pawn is pinned to the rook. So at this point, you could probably claim that white has a clear advantage and maybe getting close to that decisive advantage territory. So I think a takeaway from me here on this move is sometimes you have to take some risks to create new imbalances in order to get the win. I was playing a bit too solid, and I played knight back to c3, not showing any ambition here. And I think part of it was I was trying to play on the clock. I just didn't see knight to g5 working, and I wanted to try to wear my opponent down on the clock. Knight e6 played. Now I play knight to b1, trying to round up this pawn with a rook lift. Knight e4, knight d4, excuse me, and that's a very strong move. Hits the queen, hits f3, so I have to take. Pawn takes back, but now look at what black is doing. He's getting some counterplay. He now has this passed d pawn to create some problems, defended by the bishop on g7. So that bishop is becoming a stronger piece now because it's not the e pawn, which is locked in by my pawn. It's now a passed pawn that's fluid. It can push forward at any point. Rook to d3 to blockade and attack this. Knight e5, another good move. And again, I have to take. So look at now how active this bishop is. Hitting the h2 square, guarding d4. Black's fighting back, and my b1 knight is a pretty bad piece. I grab the pawn, bishop back to g7, rook f3, and I think I'm going down the wrong path here. This is the wrong idea. What I should play is knight to c4, and there's no queen takes a2. That's why I rejected this move. I didn't think that my knight could move at all, but there is knight to b6 here. And after queen takes queen, I can take back with the rook. These rooks are still forked. So knight c4 would have been an improvement. I played rook to f3, double attacking this pawn, rook f8, and now rook to c5. I'm trying to get very active. This is threatening maybe rook to a5. And after queen to e2, I did see this move. I had calculated that I could play rook takes c6, allow the check, and after this, my plan was rook to c7. And rook to c7 could be a good move potentially if there was no fork. But the problem is there's always a fork there. This square checks the king and attacks the rook at the same time. So that failed. Instead, I had to bail out and play the rook back to c1. It's still a better position for white. Not a lot better, but I still have winning chances. Bishop e5 check played. Here I move my king back to g1. This sets me up for back rank mate potential because the bishop guards h2. A better move considering the clock situation is to play g3. Don't even allow this idea of a back rank mate. For example, pawn to h5, I can now play knight c4, getting ready to trade the bishop, and I have these two passers that want to run up the board, and my king is pretty safe. So king g1 played in the game. Kevin plays rook a to c8, offering the rook trade. So at this point I had 10 minutes to Kevin's 3 minutes, and I was trying to calculate for a few minutes what happens after rook takes c8. Because I was thinking, okay, rook takes back. Do I play queen takes check? The king has to hide in the corner. Is there a mate? So I was very tunnel visioned on, can I figure out, does rook takes c8 work, followed by queen takes f7 check? I decide to play it. I go to write down my move on the notation sheet, and out of the corner of my eye, I see Kevin's hand reach across the table. He plays queen e1, checkmate, and it's over. Checkmate in one, back rank mate, completely fell for it, no excuses. I had time on the clock, 30-second increment. I knew the back rank mate was in the air, and I was the one that set it up. I moved my rook off the first rank, allowing black to get the back rank mate, which is just crazy. I do think black played a really good game. You know, he took an uncomfortable position out of the opening and really held that like right around 1 point stockfish advantage the whole game. I missed a couple of chances to play for the win, and I did allow this counterplay at the end. So I think the main takeaway for me is keep working on calculation. It's something that I've had issues with in slow chess, and also take more risks. So I've been playing a little bit too passive when I do have the advantage. I need to calculate well, be confident in those calculations, and take a few more risks. So there you have it. Back rank mate. I fell for it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.